The room went silent the moment the child spoke. It wasn't the polite silence of a luxury club when a VIP stood up. It was the wrong kind, the kind that spread like a crack through glass. Crystal laughter died mid-breath. A fork froze halfway to a mouth. Even the pianist's fingers stopped above the keys without touching them. The boy's small voice had not been loud. He had only looked at the man in the tailored midnight suit and said, calmly, almost curiously, "You're not the real one. You're the test." 3 seconds earlier, people had been laughing at his mother. Now, no one moved. At the center table, the man in the midnight suit slowly lowered his glass. His expression didn't change, but something in the air did, like the pressure before a storm. 2 guards near the marble column shifted their stance at the exact same time, not looking at each other, but clearly reacting to the same signal. The boy didn't notice. He was still holding the small silver token he had picked up from the table. A thin metal disc engraved with a symbol that none of the guests had paid attention to until that second. His mother noticed, and her blood turned cold. 20 minutes earlier, she had been invisible. Elena moved quietly between tables, the way staff at the Aurelian private club were trained to move. Silent, efficient, forgettable. Her black uniform was perfectly pressed, her hair pinned tight, her eyes lowered just enough to seem respectful without looking weak. Invisible was safe. Invisible meant no one asked questions. The Aurelian wasn't a place where mistakes were forgiven. It wasn't even a place listed on maps. The members called it a club. The city called it a rumor. And the people who worked there called it what it really was: a room full of men who never lost. Elena kept her focus on the tray in her hands. Crystal glasses. 12. No fingerprints. No sound. Behind her, laughter erupted from table 7, the loud kind. Not joy. Performance. She didn't need to look to know who it was. Victor Hale. Tech billionaire. Media darling. Collector of politicians and enemies. The kind of man who tipped generously when cameras were present and didn't tip at all when they weren't. Tonight, there were no cameras. "Elena," he said, without turning, "you speak English, right?" A few men at the table smirked before she even answered. She stepped closer. "Yes, sir." He tilted his head slightly, as if studying a painting he might buy or burn. "Good, because I'm about to say something complicated, and I'd hate for you to misunderstand." Soft chuckles. Elena felt the familiar tightening in her chest. Not fear, preparation. Victor lifted a small card from the table, thick paper, embossed edges. "Translate this for me, out loud." The card was blank. She saw that instantly. A test. The men around him leaned back, waiting. One of them whispered something in another language and laughed under his breath. Elena didn't react. She had learned long ago that reactions were currency here, and she couldn't afford to spend any. "It's blank, sir," she said calmly. Victor smiled, not pleasantly. "Oh, I know that," he said. "I just wanted to see if you'd pretend it wasn't. Some people do. They invent things. It's very entertaining." A few more laughs, louder this time. He placed the card back on the table and tapped it once. "Tell me something. Do you understand jokes?" "Yes, sir." "Good. Then you'll understand this one." He gestured lazily toward her shoes. "Those cost more than your monthly salary." More laughter. Elena kept her hands steady on the tray. Inside, she counted her breaths. 1, 2, 3. Across the room, near the entrance, her son sat on a velvet bench where she had told him to stay. He was small, quiet, watching everything with wide, observant eyes. The night nanny she had arranged had canceled an hour earlier. She hadn't had time to find another option. Missing a shift at the Aurelian meant never working in the district again. So she had brought him, just for a few hours. He hadn't made a sound, not once. Victor followed her gaze and noticed the child for the first time. His eyebrow lifted. "You brought entertainment." A man beside him leaned forward. That yours? Elena nodded once. Yes, sir. Victor studied the boy the way traders studied commodities, evaluating, pricing. How old? 4. Old enough to speak? Yes. Victor smiled again, the same smile. Bring him here. The words were soft. They were not a request. A faint shift passed through the table. Interest sharpened. Shoulders straightened. Predators sensing motion. Elena's pulse ticked once, hard. This was the moment where saying no became dangerous. She set the tray down carefully. Of course, sir. Her steps toward the bench felt longer than the distance allowed. The boy looked up as she approached, his expression brightening slightly, not with excitement, but recognition. He trusted her completely. That trust pressed against her ribs like glass. Stay close to me, she murmured. He nodded and slipped his hand into hers. When they returned to the table, conversation nearby had already slowed. Attention drifted toward them the way iron filings drifted toward a magnet. Victor rested his elbow on the arm of his chair. What's your name? He asked the boy. The child answered softly but clearly. Noah. Well, Noah, Victor said, we're having a very serious discussion. Do you think you can help us? Noah glanced at his mother. She gave the smallest nod she could manage. He looked back at Victor. Maybe. A ripple of amusement circled the table. Victor slid a small object across the white linen toward him, a thin silver token, engraved, heavy for its size. Tell me what this is, Victor said. Elena's stomach tightened. She had seen that symbol before. Not here, not recently. Years ago, in a life she had buried. Noah, she said quietly, you don't have to. It's okay, Victor interrupted, still smiling. We're just playing a game. Noah picked up the token, turned it once, looked at it carefully. Then he lifted his eyes to Victor and spoke. You're not the real one, he said. You're the test. The silence that followed did not belong to a game. It belonged to recognition. And Elena realized, with a cold certainty spreading through her chest, something had just gone terribly, irreversibly wrong. No one laughed. Victor Hale didn't blink, didn't move, didn't breathe any differently. But the men around him did. One shifted in his chair. Another lowered his glass too slowly. A third turned his head a fraction toward the guards by the column. Elena saw all of it. Years of training herself to read rooms, dangerous rooms, had taught her one thing. Silence had textures. This one was sharp. Noah still held the token between his fingers, studying the engraving like it was a puzzle piece from a toy set. He wasn't scared. He didn't understand what he had done. Victor finally spoke. What, he said softly, did you just say? His tone was calm, almost gentle. That was worse. Noah repeated it without hesitation. You're not the real one. You're the test. A glass clinked somewhere behind them. Too loud, too sudden. Victor's gaze shifted, not to Elena, not to the table, but to the symbol in the child's hand. For the first time, the smile vanished. Elena felt it like a draft of cold air across her neck. He knew it. Not recognized. Knew. Victor leaned back slightly. Interesting, he said. The men around him didn't relax. One of them, silver-haired, watch worth more than Elena's yearly income, leaned forward. Kids guessing, he muttered. Coincidence. Victor didn't answer him. He was still looking at Noah. How would you know that? He asked. Noah shrugged. You don't talk like the real one. A faint crease appeared between Victor's brows. And how does the real one talk? The boy thought about it seriously. Slower. A pause. Then quietly. and people don't interrupt him. One of the men actually inhaled. Victor's fingers tapped once against the armrest. Not nervous, calculating. Elena's pulse was loud in her ears now. She knew that symbol. She knew the rule attached to it. She had prayed for years she would never see it again. The token Noah held wasn't decoration. It was a marker. Inside certain circles, circles that didn't appear on company boards or government lists, that symbol meant only one thing: authority present, protocol active. Victor's voice dropped half a note. "Who told you that?" Noah tilted his head. "No one." "That's not possible." The boy considered that, then said simply, "I heard it." The silver-haired man scoffed. "He's 4. He hears cartoons." A few forced chuckles flickered and died quickly. Victor didn't laugh. He extended his hand. "Give me the coin." Noah looked at Elena. She wanted to say no. Every instinct screamed it. But every survival rule she had ever learned told her the same thing. Do not create a scene. Do not resist. Do not draw a line unless you're ready to defend it. She nodded once. Noah placed the token in Victor's palm. Victor turned it slowly between his fingers. The overhead chandelier light slid across the engraved symbol, a minimalist crest most people would mistake for abstract art. 3 lines, 1 break, 1 dot. Harmless. Unless you knew. Victor exhaled through his nose. Then he stood. Chairs shifted around the table instantly as the other men followed his movement without thinking. Power rose when he did, but not the same power as before. This time it was cautious. "Excuse us," Victor said to them. No one argued. He stepped away from the table and walked toward the tall window overlooking the private drive. Noah watched him go with open curiosity, like he was observing an actor mid-scene. Elena didn't move. Couldn't. The silver-haired man leaned toward her, voice low and tight. "Cute trick. You rehearsed that?" "I don't know what you mean, sir." His eyes narrowed. "Don't lie to me in this room." Before she could answer, one of the guards near the column touched his earpiece. It was subtle, but Victor saw it. Across the room, Victor stopped walking. Didn't turn yet, just stood there, looking at his reflection in the glass. Outside, beyond the iron gates, headlights appeared. Not 1 car, 3. They didn't speed, they rolled. Slow, deliberate. Identical black sedans, their beams cutting through the mist like blades. A murmur rippled through the tables behind Elena. Wealthy men noticed patterns for a living, and those cars were a pattern. Victor finally spoke, still facing the window. "That," he said quietly, "is unexpected." The guard near the column shifted his stance again, straighter now, formal. Elena's throat tightened. She knew that formation, not from this life, from before. Behind her, someone whispered, "Who's arriving?" Another voice answered, barely audible, "No one scheduled." Victor turned back toward the room. For a fraction of a second, something unfamiliar passed through his eyes. Uncertainty. He walked back toward Elena and Noah, slower this time, measured, studying. When he stopped in front of them, he crouched slightly so his gaze was level with the child's. "What else did you hear?" he asked. Noah blinked. "About what?" "About the real one." The boy thought again. Then he said quietly, "He doesn't like loud people." At that exact moment, outside, the first car engine shut off. The sound carried through the glass, soft, final. Victor's jaw tightened. The silver-haired man stood abruptly. "If this is some kind of stunt..." Victor raised one finger. The man stopped talking instantly. Noah watched this exchange with fascination. "Elena," Victor said without looking away from the child, "how long have you worked here?" 3 months, sir." "And before that?" "A hotel." "And before that?" She hesitated. "Not long, but long enough." "Different places," she said. Victor nodded once, like he had expected that answer. Outside, a car door opened. Not slammed. Opened. Measured. Every guard in the room subtly adjusted their posture at the same time. Victor rose slowly to his full height. When he spoke again, his voice had changed. Quieter, sharper. "Take the boy," he said to Elena. "Stand behind me." The words were calm, but they were not optional. Elena's fingers tightened around Noah's hand, because she understood something now that the others didn't yet. The room hadn't gone silent because of what Noah said. It had gone silent because of what his words meant. And whoever was stepping out of that car outside was someone even Victor Hale didn't control. No one in the Aurelian private club turned toward the entrance. Not openly. Powerful men never snapped their heads like civilians. They adjusted their attention the way predators adjusted their weight. Subtle, efficient, ready. But every eye in the room was listening. The sound of shoes on marble carried through the foyer beyond the double doors. Slow, even, unhurried. Not the stride of someone entering a party, the stride of someone who already owned it. Elena's hand tightened around Noah's. Victor Hale stood in front of them now, not touching them, not shielding them, but positioned with unmistakable intent. His body blocked them from the main sightline of the entrance. To anyone watching, it might look casual. It wasn't. It was placement. The silver-haired man at the table leaned closer to another guest and whispered, "Who's on the list tonight?" "No one," came the reply. "Not at this hour." The doors opened. They didn't swing. They parted. Two men stepped in first. Not bodyguards. Announcers. Their suits were identical charcoal. Their expressions identical neutral. They didn't scan the room like security. They observed it like auditors. Their eyes moved once, left to right, memorizing. Then they stepped aside, and the third figure entered. The temperature in the room dropped. He wasn't large, not towering, not physically intimidating in the way Victor's hired muscle were. He was older, silver threaded through dark hair, posture straight, movements economical. His coat was black, perfectly tailored, draped rather than worn. But power didn't radiate off him, it condensed around him. Every conversation in the room died without being told to. Elena felt her lungs forget how to breathe. Because she knew that presence. Not his face, his presence. Years ago, in another country, in another life, she had seen men stand exactly like that when someone important entered. Not rich, not famous, important. The man paused just inside the threshold. He didn't look around immediately. He didn't need to. People looked at him. The club manager appeared at his side so fast it was almost a blur, bowing slightly. "Sir, we weren't informed of your—" The man lifted a finger. The manager stopped speaking mid-word, not silenced, paused. The man's gaze moved across the room, slow, methodical, assessing. Elena lowered her eyes instantly, not out of submission, out of instinct. Victor didn't. Victor Hale watched him directly. That was the first real sign something was wrong, because powerful men didn't watch each other like that unless they were measuring distance to a cliff. The newcomer's eyes stopped, on Victor. A beat passed, then another. Victor inclined his head, barely. Not a bow, not quite respect, acknowledgement. The man returned the gesture, exactly the same. Across the room, someone quietly set down a glass. Another guest shifted his chair a centimeter backward. No one spoke. Then the man's gaze moved again, past Victor, to Elena, to Noah, and stopped. Elena felt it like a hand closing around the back of her neck. The man studied the child, not warmly, not coldly, precisely. He took one step closer. One of Victor's guards moved half an inch. Victor didn't look at the guard, but he said softly, "Don't." The guard froze. The older man continued forward until he stood 3 feet away. Up close, his eyes were dark gray, not dull, metallic, like polished stone. He spoke. "Where," he said calmly. Did he get that token? His voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. Victor answered, tone equally measured. From my table. The man's gaze shifted to Victor. Why was it on your table? Victor didn't answer immediately, because there was no harmless answer. Finally, decoration. A pause. The man considered that. Then he looked back at Noah. May I? He asked, extending his hand. He wasn't asking Victor, he was asking the child. Noah looked at Elena again. Her pulse thundered. She wanted to say no. She wanted to run. She wanted to vanish. But there is a moment in certain rooms, rare, dangerous rooms, when you understand something fundamental. Refusal is louder than a scream. She gave the smallest nod. Noah placed his hand in the man's. The man didn't shake it. He simply held it lightly, as if testing weight, temperature, reality. What is your name? He asked. Noah. How old are you, Noah? 4? The man nodded once. And how did you know that wasn't the real one? Noah tilted his head. He talks too fast. Silence. The man's eyes flickered once toward Victor. Victor's jaw tightened almost invisibly. And how does the real one talk? The man asked. Noah answered immediately. Like you. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. A sound moved through the room. Not a gasp, not a whisper. Something smaller, sharper. Recognition. The man released Noah's hand, slowly. Then he straightened and turned toward Victor fully. Step outside with me, he said. Not a request. Victor didn't move. For one dangerous second, the entire room held its breath again. Then Victor nodded once. Of course. He glanced back at Elena. Not warmth, not reassurance. Instruction. Stay. He followed the man toward the doors. They walked side by side, equal pace, equal silence. The doors closed behind them. The second they shut, the room erupted in whispers. Low, urgent, controlled panic wrapped in politeness. Who is that? Was that? No, it can't be. Elena didn't listen, because she already knew something the others were still trying to guess. She had seen that reaction before. Men like Victor didn't step outside with strangers. They stepped outside with superiors. Noah tugged her sleeve gently. Mom? She looked down. Yes? He pointed toward the doors. Did I do something bad? Her throat tightened. No, she said softly. But across the room, 3 of Victor's associates were already watching her like she was a locked safe they needed opened. And Elena understood something with perfect clarity. The real danger hadn't arrived yet. It had just stepped outside to decide what to do with her. The whispers never reached full volume. They couldn't. Rooms like this had rules. Panic had etiquette. Fear wore cufflinks. Elena stood exactly where Victor had left her, one hand resting lightly on Noah's shoulder. She didn't shift her weight, didn't glance around too quickly, didn't fidget. Stillness was armor. But inside, her thoughts were moving fast. Too fast. Across the table, the silver-haired man leaned back in his chair, studying her openly now. His earlier amusement was gone. In its place was calculation, the kind accountants used when deciding whether something was an asset or a liability. You're not staff, he said quietly. It wasn't a question. Elena met his gaze calmly. I am. No, he replied. You work here. That's different. One of the other men murmured, You saw how Hale reacted. He didn't control that situation. That man outside controls him, another whispered back. Silverhair didn't look away from Elena. And somehow, he said softly, your child knew it. Noah shifted slightly beside her. She felt the movement through her palm like an electric signal. She answered evenly. Children say strange things. Not in rooms like this. A pause. Then, what's your last name? A small question, a dangerous one. Elena, she said, is enough. A faint smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. Not friendly. appreciative. "You're careful," he said. Before she could respond, one of Victor's guards near the pillar spoke quietly into his sleeve. Not into a visible mic, into fabric. Concealed comms. Silverhair noticed. So did everyone else. The room stilled again, because guards didn't report unless something had happened. The guard listened, nodded once. Then his eyes shifted toward Elena, not hostile, alert. And that was worse. The main doors opened again. Victor stepped inside. Alone. Every spine straightened. He walked the same way he always had. Measured, unhurried, controlled. But Elena saw it. The difference. A slight tension in his shoulders. A precise tightness in his jaw. The kind a man carried when he'd just been given instructions he didn't like. He returned to the table and didn't sit. Instead, he looked at Elena. Not through her. At her. "The gentleman outside," Victor said calmly, "would like to speak with you." No one breathed. Not one person in that room. The silver-haired man whispered, almost inaudible, "Oh, that's not good." Elena didn't react outwardly. Inside, something old and buried shifted awake. "Of course," she said. Victor's gaze dropped briefly to Noah. "He stays." Not a suggestion. Elena shook her head once. "No." It was quiet, but it landed like a glass shattering. 3 men at the table stiffened. Victor's eyes lifted back to hers. Slowly. "No," he repeated. Her voice remained steady. "He stays with me." A silence fell so deep it felt padded. Power, in rooms like this, was measured by what you could refuse. Victor studied her for a long moment. He wasn't angry. He was assessing. Behind him, one of the guards shifted again, waiting for the signal that never came. Victor finally said, "Why?" Elena answered truthfully. "Because if he's the reason I'm being called," she said, "then separating us would be a mistake." A pause. Victor's eyes flicked once toward the door, then back to her. And something subtle changed in his expression. Interest. Not in her defiance, in her logic. "All right," he said. Several men at the table exhaled softly in disbelief. Victor stepped aside and gestured toward the entrance. "This way." Elena took Noah's hand. The room parted for them instantly. Not dramatically, just enough. As she walked, she could feel every gaze following her, calculating, curious, wary. Men who ran banks, ports, campaigns, shell corporations. Men who never feared waitresses, but they feared variables, and she had just become one. The foyer outside the main hall was quieter, dimmer, colder. Marble floors, black glass walls. A single chandelier casting long surgical light. The older man stood near the entrance steps, hands clasped behind his back, looking not at the doors, but at the night beyond them. He didn't turn when she approached. He spoke first. "You worked hard to disappear." It wasn't a guess. Elena's grip tightened slightly around Noah's hand. "I work," she said, "where I'm hired." A faint pause, then, "No," the man said. "You worked very hard to disappear." He turned. Up close, his gaze was even sharper than before. Not hostile, not kind, precise. "Most people run from power," he continued. "You ran from structure. That's rarer." Victor stayed behind her now, silent, observing. The man's eyes shifted to Noah. "This," he said softly, "is unexpected." Noah stared back without fear. The man crouched slightly, so they were eye level. "What did you hear, Noah?" The boy thought, then answered. "The man who talks slow, he said the token means someone important is here, and if someone pretends, the room should go quiet." The man's expression didn't change, but Victor's did, barely. Enough. The man straightened again. "And where," he asked gently, "did you hear that?" Noah pointed, at Elena. The air changed, not dramatically, precisely. Victor's gaze snapped to her. Not suspicion, recognition. The older man studied her face in silence for several seconds. Then he said quietly, "So," a pause, "you finally surfaced." Elena felt the past she had buried for years open like a door behind her. She didn't deny it, didn't confirm it, just met his eyes. Behind her, Victor Hale spoke for the first time since they stepped outside. Low, measured. "Who is she?" The older man didn't look at him. He answered while still watching Elena. "She," he said calmly, "is the only person in this city who ever disappeared from us and survived." Silence. Then he added, "And now she's back." Noah squeezed Elena's fingers. "Mom," he whispered, "are we in trouble?" She didn't look down, didn't look away. She kept her eyes locked on the man in front of her, and answered softly, "That," she said, "depends on why he's here." The man's mouth curved almost imperceptibly. Not a smile. Recognition. "Oh," he said, "I'm here because of you." The night air outside the Aurelian was colder than it should have been. Not winter cold, decision cold. The kind that settled in your lungs and waited. Elena didn't speak. She knew better. In rooms like the one behind her, and in the world that extended beyond its walls, silence wasn't emptiness. It was leverage. Whoever spoke first gave something away. The older man watched her with the patience of someone who had never needed to rush a single thing in his life. Victor stood half a step behind her now, no longer host, no longer dominant presence, just present, observing, measuring the same way a chess player studies a board after realizing the opponent has already seen 3 moves ahead. Finally, the man said, "You vanished 11 years ago." It wasn't a question. Elena answered just as evenly, "Yes." Victor's gaze flicked between them. The man continued, "No forwarding trail, no digital shadow, no financial echo, no alliances, no enemies. Do you know how difficult that is?" "I imagine it depends who's looking." A pause. Victor exhaled slowly through his nose. The older man's eyes sharpened a fraction. "It depends," he said, "on whether the person disappearing understands systems." Another beat, then, "You did." Behind Elena, one of the guards shifted weight, not threatening, alert, like a soldier hearing distant thunder. The man tilted his head slightly. "Most people who try to leave that world die. Quietly. Inevitably. You didn't. I was careful. You were trained." That landed heavier. Victor's voice came, low and controlled. "Someone mind explaining which world we're discussing?" The older man finally looked at him, not dismissively, not respectfully, simply directly. "The one you rent space from," he said. Victor's jaw tightened almost invisibly. Silence. Then the man's attention returned to Elena. "You built a life beneath notice. Cleaning staff, temporary contracts, cash payments, no attachments, except one." His gaze lowered briefly to Noah. Elena didn't move. "He wasn't part of the original plan," the man said. "No." "No," he repeated thoughtfully. "Children rarely are." Noah watched him with calm curiosity. "Are you the real one?" Victor's head turned sharply. The guards froze. The question didn't sound dangerous. It was. The man looked at Noah, and for the first time since entering the building, he smiled. Not wide, not warm, but real. "Yes," he said. Victor inhaled once, sharply. Elena felt it behind her. The moment he understood. Not who the man was, what he was. The kind of authority that didn't announce itself because it didn't need to. Noah nodded, satisfied. "Okay," The man straightened slowly. Your son, he said, still watching the boy, recognized a verification protocol used only inside a sealed tier of our network. Victor's eyes snapped to Elena again. Our network? He repeated. The man ignored him. He recognized it, he continued, because he heard it before he could form permanent memory. Elena's fingers tightened slightly. The man's gaze lifted back to her. Which means, he said quietly, you didn't leave as early as we thought. A long silence stretched. Victor spoke again, softer now. Someone want to tell me what that means? This time the older man answered. It means, he said, she didn't just walk away from us. He paused. She walked away while still inside. Victor didn't move, didn't blink. Understanding spread across his face like ink in water. Inside, he repeated quietly. Elena finally spoke. I wasn't planning to stay. No one ever is, the man replied mildly. A faint breeze stirred across the drive. The black sedans idled soundlessly behind him, headlights dimmed like waiting eyes. Victor folded his hands behind his back. You brought half a convoy for a former employee? The man's gaze shifted to him again. No, a beat. I brought them for a liability. The word didn't sound insulting. It sounded precise. Victor glanced once more at Elena, then at Noah, then back to the man. And which one is it? The man's answer was immediate. Yes. Silence. The world seemed to narrow to the space between them. Elena understood the equation forming. She had seen it done before. A mind weighing risk against usefulness, exposure against potential. Finally, the man spoke again. There are 3 possible outcomes tonight, he said calmly. He lifted one finger. I erase you. Quietly, efficiently. The system closes the file. No future complications. Second finger. I relocate you. Controlled environment. New identity. You live. Under supervision. Third finger. Or, he let the word hang. I restore you. Victor's eyes narrowed. Restore? The man didn't look away from Elena. You return, he said simply. Not as you were, as something else. Noah squeezed her hand again. She felt his small fingers, warm and trusting, wrapped around hers. That was the only thing that mattered. The man waited. He didn't rush her. Powerful men didn't chase answers. They let them walk forward on their own. Elena took one breath, then another. When she spoke, her voice was calm. What does restore mean? The faintest hint of approval crossed the man's expression. It means, he said, the world you escaped no longer hunts you. A pause. It works for you. Victor's posture changed almost imperceptibly. Not resistance, recognition. The man added softly, you wouldn't be returning as prey. Silence settled again. Elena looked down at Noah. He looked back up at her, completely certain she would make the right decision. She lifted her gaze to the man. And my son? He is protected, the man said. Absolutely, permanently, under my authority. That was the first offer that mattered. Victor watched her closely now. Not like a predator, like a strategist waiting to see which piece she would move. Elena asked one last question. If I refuse? The man didn't hesitate. Then you disappear again. A beat. And this time, he added gently, we help. The wind shifted. Somewhere behind them, a car door clicked softly as metal cooled. Elena studied him for several long seconds. Then she nodded once. Not agreement, decision. All right, she said quietly. Victor's attention sharpened. The guards went perfectly still. The man's eyes focused. Elena finished. Explain the job. For the first time that night, The man smiled like someone who had just confirmed a prediction made years ago. "Welcome back," he said. And just like that, the power in the night changed sides.